In the final years of World War II, thousands of captured German soldiers were shipped across the Atlantic, not to prison cells, but to small towns in America. What they found there would challenge everything they believed about their enemy. German POWs arrive in western Massachusetts. This story is based on the article "Hospitality is the Best Form of Propaganda: German Prisoners of War in Western Massachusetts, 1944–1946, written by John C. Bonfiglio, and published in the Historical Journal of Massachusetts in winter 2016. In October 1944, the first German prisoners of war arrived at Camp Westover Field in Chicopee Falls, Massachusetts. Soon after, many of them were sent to farms across Hampshire, Franklin, and Hampton counties to help local farmers with the harvest. The first group numbered 250 prisoners, but farmers quickly asked for more help to meet demand and to free American soldiers for combat overseas. At its peak, 701 German prisoners were held at Camp Westover Field. The U.S. government recognized that these men would one day return to Germany. Their experiences as POWs in America could influence their opinions of the United States and possibly affect future relations between the two nations. From 1994 to 1997, the author John Bonfiglio interviewed 25 former POWs and 20 local farmers. His research showed that, while the U.S. military introduced a formal program to re-educate the prisoners, it was actually the kindness and hospitality of local residents that left the deepest and most lasting impression. Conditions at Camp Westover Field. Camp Westover Field stood about 2 miles from Chicopee Falls and 10 miles northeast of Springfield. It occupied a small section of Westover Army Air Force Base, covering roughly 2 acres, with 11 buildings and 10 barracks. The camp was overseen by Captain John Shields, First Lieutenant Fred Reisner, and Second Lieutenant Daniel Fenning. Most of the German prisoners arrived in the United States through Boston Harbor, transported in Liberty ships returning from Europe. After processing in Boston, which included delousing, receiving prison uniforms, and filling out detailed personal forms, the prisoners were taken by rail to Springfield, and then by truck to Westover Field. Life at the camp followed a strict daily routine. 5:45 a.m. Réveil. 6 a.m. Roll call. 6:05 a.m. Breakfast. 2 p.m. Lunch. 5:50 p.m. Roll call. 5:55 p.m. Dinner. 9 p.m. Lights out. Prisoners worked both inside the camp, as cooks, mechanics, bakers, construction workers, gardeners, and maintenance staff, and outside the camp, particularly on local farms, harvesting tobacco and vegetables. Recreation was also provided. The camp was stocked with sports equipment, playing cards, board games, and musical instruments. There were organized activities such as soccer, volleyball, croquet, and table tennis. Food was plentiful and of high quality, especially compared to what many Americans received under wartime rationing. This generous treatment was intentional. The U.S. military believed that the way German POWs were treated in America could influence how American prisoners were treated in Germany. According to the 1929 Geneva Convention, which the United States followed closely, POWs were entitled to proper housing, sanitation, recreation, and medical care. Westover Field met these standards, with barracks, infirmaries, laundry facilities, and even gardens maintained by the prisoners themselves. Inspections were frequent. Representatives from the Army, the International Red Cross, and the International YMCA visited the camp. Reports consistently described Westover as well-run, with good morale, healthy living conditions, and discipline. One inspector even noted that Westover had the fewest disciplinary problems of any camp in its military district. For many of the German soldiers, conditions at Westover were a relief compared to the hardships of the war. One former prisoner even declared, "Imprisonment in America was for me the best time of my life as a soldier." Implementation of the Special Projects Program at Westover. As the number of German prisoners in the United States grew, the American military understood that these men would eventually be repatriated. Their impressions of life in captivity could influence post-war German attitudes toward the United States. On May 22, 1944, the Secretary of War approved the creation of a secret re-education effort known as the Special Projects Program, administered by the Provost Marshal General's Office. Its goal was to expose German POWs to ideas and experiences that challenged Nazi propaganda, and to encourage respect for American democracy and institutions. At Westover Field, the program was formally introduced on November 10, 1944, under the leadership of Lieutenant Daniel Fenning. He worked to organize classes in English, American history, civics, Latin, and geography. Newspapers, books, and films, many of them translated into German, were also made available. Cultural activities, including plays, music, and camp events, were encouraged to highlight the diversity of American life. To expand opportunities, Fenning tried to bring in civilian professors from local colleges. Though Washington's approval came slowly, and many lecturers became unavailable, he still managed to set up classes and programs. The centerpiece of the initiative was a camp newspaper. On April 15, 1945, Westover published its first edition, called Die Brücke, the Bridge. Its title symbolized a connection between Germany, represented by the Brandenburg Gate, and America, represented by New York's skyline. The paper featured poems, short stories, camp news, sports updates, and announcements for choir and orchestra rehearsals. It also included references to the classes being offered and encouraged prisoners to discuss American culture, politics, and daily life. The Special Projects program was meant to show German soldiers that life in America was freer, more open, and more prosperous than what they had known under Nazi rule. While its official impact was debated, the newspaper, classes, and cultural activities became a distinctive part of camp life at Westover. Interactions between POWs and local farmers. While camp activities filled time, the main purpose of Westover Field was to provide labor during wartime shortages. German POWs were contracted out to farms in the Pioneer Valley, where their work proved essential. Requests for POW labor were handled through the War Manpower Commission. Farmers needed to pass inspections to qualify. Their land was surveyed to determine how many workers were required, and even the trucks used to transport prisoners had to meet specific safety rules. Prisoners were paid 80 cents per day, not in cash but in coupons redeemable at the camp canteen. For many farmers, they were a welcome workforce, young, strong, and accustomed to discipline. Some farmers even noted that crops were harvested more efficiently with POW labor than with scarce civilian workers. The experiences varied. At Lankowski Farms, prisoners harvested potatoes for the U.S. Army and Navy. The first group of POWs included professionals, doctors, engineers, and professors, who proved excellent workers. A later group of former SS men, however, were more difficult, sometimes sabotaging equipment. When sabotage was suspected, the prisoner was removed from the work detail. Despite official rules against fraternization, many personal relationships formed. Some farmers shared meals with the POWs or invited them into their homes. On one farm, a prisoner named Herbert Neither often sang while working, and later corresponded with the family for years after the war. Another farmer, John Lankowski, went so far as to sponsor a former POW's immigration to the United States in 1949. Local residents recalled these men as proud, tall, and strong workers. Some of the young farm women even spoke with them in Polish or Russian, languages the prisoners also knew. Although care was taken to ensure safety, many families grew comfortable with the prisoners' presence. For the POWs, farm work offered something rare, genuine human contact outside the wire. They labored, ate, and sometimes laughed with American civilians. These interactions created impressions of kindness and fairness that official propaganda could never match. POWs' recollections of Camp Westover Field. Many of the German prisoners later remembered their time at Westover Field with surprising warmth. Their recollections, gathered decades later by John Bonfilia through letters and interviews, reveal how camp life and contact with Americans shaped their views. Friedrich Geitel, captured in 1944, worked first in a warehouse and later in the hospital. Fluent in English, he often interacted with American personnel. He recalled that discipline ruled the camp, escape was never discussed, and he later returned to visit American families he had befriended. Walter Goertz worked both in a car repair shop and on farms. He said he enjoyed farm work most, welcomed contact with civilians, and remembered some farmers wishing they could keep the German workers permanently. Ernst Goetzel, fluent in English, was surprised by the quality and quantity of food served at Westover. He worked in the fields, played violin in the camp band, wrote music, and taught English to fellow POWs. Otto Holmes described the camp as civilized, with proper washrooms and toilets, but he was troubled by the lack of contact with his family until the war's end. He was later disappointed when, instead of being sent home, he and others were transferred to England for labor after the war. Wolfgang Joner had a similar experience, believing he would be returned directly to Germany. but instead sent to England until 1948. He remained bitter about being misled. Max Klein was able to correspond with relatives in New York who visited him at Westover. He took part in classes, studied English and French, and spent his free time playing soccer or watching films. Carl Wilhelm Lorenz remembered Captain John Shields paying out of his own pocket for movie equipment so the prisoners could watch films. Lorenz worked in the canteen in winter and on farms in summer, enjoying table tennis, billiards, and movies during his free time. Bernhard Lutz had a glass eye replaced while at Westover. Politically aware, he reflected that many Germans still admired Hitler at the time, but his own impression of America was positive. He later believed the German people owed many freedoms to U.S. influence after the war. Gerhard Riese remembered being welcomed by Lieutenant Fenning, who told prisoners they could have a good life in camp if they behaved. Riese worked in the officers' mess and on farms, finding most farmers fair, even if not always friendly. Manfred Rook recalled a fair and just American sergeant, moments of kindness from guards, and lively political debates inside the camp. He admitted that, as a young man, he once believed in Hitler, but through exposure to American newspapers and magazines, he began to rethink his beliefs. Taken together, these memories show that what left the deepest mark was not propaganda, but the human treatment prisoners received from soldiers, officers, and farmers alike. Assessing the Special Projects Program. By early 1946, American officers at Westover Field were asked to evaluate the effectiveness of the Special Projects Program. Their assessments revealed both strengths and limitations. Captain Fred Reisner noted that English classes were the most successful element. Exposure to the language encouraged some prisoners to explore American government and democracy more deeply. Lieutenant Daniel Fenning agreed the program had an impact, but he believed its success lay less in formal teaching and more in the simple fact that prisoners' basic needs, food, shelter, and clothing, were met generously. Prisoners themselves had mixed views. Camp spokesman Heinrich Plagemann believed older POWs managed to influence younger men to question Nazi beliefs, though committed Nazis remained resistant. Chaplain Werner Knaus thought the younger prisoners were divided. Some hard heads were unmoved, others focused only on immediate concerns, while a smaller group was open to learning. On a national level, reports suggested some success. 1 in 4 German POWs in the US gained working knowledge of English. 1 in 5 attended formal classes, and on average each prisoner read or purchased about 15 books during captivity. Religious attendance increased, but film attendance declined sharply, with many prisoners dismissing the movies as propaganda. There were setbacks. After Victory in Europe Day, the Army imposed restrictions. Prisoners could no longer buy beer, candy, or cigarettes in camp canteens. To many POWs, this felt like unjust punishment, even contrary to the Geneva Convention. Another problem was the transfer of Nazi troublemakers from other camps into Westover. Their presence undermined re-education by spreading propaganda and disrupting efforts to shift opinions. In the end, the Special Projects Program was judged uneven. Some prisoners did begin questioning old beliefs, especially younger men. But most lasting impressions came not from lectures or films, but from the daily experience of fair treatment, decent living conditions, and kindness from Americans. Afterward, the research journey. The story of Westover Field's German prisoners might have been forgotten if not for the research of John C. Bonfilia, who authored the original article. His interest began in the mid-1990s while he was a student at Westfield State University and working in Washington, D.C. Intrigued by the little-known fact that German POWs had once been held in Massachusetts, he began searching archives, historical societies, and newspapers. He placed ads in local papers, which led him to farmers who had employed prisoners during the war. Many were elderly by then, but still eager to share their memories. To reach the former POWs themselves, Bonfilia contacted the Deutsche Dienststelle in Germany, which provided him with a list of men once held at Westover who were willing to be contacted. He sent them letters and questionnaires, eventually corresponding with 25 former prisoners. Some responded by letter, others by phone, and in many cases their families also contributed memories. Bonfilia also sought out the American officers who had commanded the camp. Though most had already passed away, he located the widow of Lieutenant Daniel Fenning, who shared photographs and letters her husband had written daily during his service at Westover. These letters gave a vivid picture of daily camp life, but tragically, Bonfilia later lost the collection to theft. Despite these setbacks, his persistence produced a detailed record of a forgotten chapter of World War II history. His work showed how ordinary people, farmers, guards, officers, and prisoners, created experiences of kindness and fairness that shaped memories more deeply than propaganda ever could. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time to watch this video. I would appreciate your support by clicking the subscribe and like button.